So with that, I'd like to introduce Heidi Carroll. Heidi is a Minnesota native that grew up on a small family farm. Heidi gained her love of livestock from her father, Peter, who is a livestock nutritionist. He allowed her to tag along on farm calls and learn through doing, and by asking a million questions. As a result, Heidi completed both her bachelor's and her master's degree in animal science from South Dakota State University. Between her degrees, she spent a year teaching English at China Agricultural University in Beijing, China, and a year working as the assistant bar manager for the SDSU equestrian team in Brookings, South Dakota. Currently in her role as the SDSU Extension Livestock Stewardship Associate, she conducts producer certification trainings for the various livestock quality assurance programs and presents low-stress livestock handling methods. Please welcome Heidi Carroll.
All right, well, thank you for the invitation to be here today. Thank you also for the opportunity to speak with your youth. So hopefully you guys will find some benefit in this challenging topic that I had agreed to speak about. Animals might be the easy thing, but when we start talking people, the livestock crowd sometimes starts to get a little squirmish. So bear with me. If I hit the uncomfortable button every now and then, I'm not sorry. So I hope that you guys listen with an open mind. And me following the lunch makes it even more challenging. So I'm going to ask, how many of you are livestock producers? Please stand. You have your own animals. Please stand. Okay. Thank you. Sit down. How many of you are working with the university or in academia of some sort? Please stand. All right. So we're pretty good, pretty balanced. Sit down, please. How many of you are working in an industry role? May it be nutrition, consulting? All right. Good. Thank you very much. So the topic of livestock stewardship is kind of a phrase that maybe all of us are not as familiar with. So if you see these pictures up here, what comes to mind? Shout out some answers. There, that was the first answer at the youth also. Good. Okay, when we start to see these images of youth projects, we see these images at the fair, it's a very positive image about livestock production. If I change the view a little bit, I know these are sheep. I didn't have the same pictures for cattle yet, so bear with me. We do all the same procedures with our cattle. Now what comes to mind? Okay, it's not quite as nice as the other image we've seen. This is day-to-day life. This is what cattlemen, cattlewomen do on a daily basis with our livestock. We feed them, we care for them, we care for the young that they produce, and at some point they end up on our plates. Now, just so you know, I work in South Dakota, and if we would have served chicken or pork at a beef meeting, we would have got slapped. Just saying. But that's because beef producers in South Dakota think they're number one as well. So if we have to talk about what we do on a daily basis, we have to also be able to justify what we do. So now, in the cattle, we don't always have it easy. We can do things a million different ways to get at the same process. And so here you see a couple examples of caring for some newborns that have the unfortunate birth date of finding some winter weather. It's accomplishing the same thing and preventing frostbite, but it looks a little different. It accomplishes the same thing. Is there a cost difference? Farmers and ranchers first want to make sure that they can do things if it affects their pocketbook. So, just bear with me. We'll cost analyze our two pictures here. On the left, if we want to create the fuzzy little ear protectors for our newborn calves that get born in, say, March or February snowstorms, we're going to make them out of some fleece material. So there's the cost of maybe making one if it takes a yard. Here's our cost of duct tape. Every farmer's essentials. So if we would cost analyze this and talk about being able to do this, well, we're going to take the reasonable option, right? To accomplish our task. But now we have to start thinking about what does livestock husbandry or livestock stewardship look like. We used to talk about livestock husbandry. Some of our animal science departments actually had the title of being animal husbandry instead of animal science departments. There's still a component of science in that title, but if we start to talk about what stewardship is, and you look up the definition of stewardship, you get a lot of different words. You've now shifted away from the scientific control or production of animals, and we've shifted. It's not just science. We're now talking about a responsibility, but who's that responsibility to? We have to understand that what we do on a daily basis now needs to have proper regard for the rights of others. Science isn't always pretty, but it's necessary if we want to figure out what our best management practices is. We have to be able to use science to justify our management practices. Are we going to figure out our nutritional standards for that animal? You're going to have to go back, do a surgery on that animal to figure out their nutritional needs. And that's where we got our research from to justify what the nutritional needs are. We have to understand that our consumer is changing what they want, but they're not saying that we have to arrive at a different place. So how do we shift from this scientific control concept that was husbandry to more of an individual responsibility concept of livestock stewardship? We're all really good about building fences. After all, we have to keep the animals in or keep other animals out. What producers are not necessarily good at is building bridges. We don't always learn how to communicate with somebody who doesn't understand agriculture. You've all listened to the social media and being able to hear about how we can reach out, how you can share your story. But you as a producer also have a responsibility to the other producers you work with. Those in academia also have to figure out how to train other youth coming into our industry to learn how to build these bridges. But every bridge has a limit, right? People have limits. We're really good at telling people to stay over there. Let me do what I'm doing on my property the way I want to do it. Doesn't always get that responsibility with regards to others' rights if we're telling everybody to stay over there and stay out of my business. So there's this fine line that we're learning how to balance when we're raising our cattle. But we always have to remember, we're raising cattle for food. Yes, we eat our own cattle, or you eat whatever animal you might raise and fill your own freezer, but somebody else that didn't raise that animal will also eat it. And so those are those things that are starting to become hot topics. Animal well-being, animal care, lameness, managing the environment that these animals live in before they end up on our plate. Then we have to think about who these neighbors are. It might be other livestock producers, or it's people you've never met. People that want to choose healthy things to feed their families. Maybe it's somebody who doesn't want to even eat meat anymore. There's a lot of people who choose to be vegan or choose to be vegetarian, and that's fine. Those aren't necessarily the people you need to talk with, but are they? We talked about engaging people with different viewpoints, understanding that those that are looking for label claims to know how that animal was raised is still important. Some of the information that the surveys that Slow Food found back in 2013 found out is these welfare labeled products that are starting to make an interest into the supermarkets, they're considered healthier, higher quality, and more environmentally sustainable. Okay, those are good things. As a producer, I think those are good things. But now we've thrown in that these products are ethically important. That's not food safety. I see John had to leave, but ethics, that's not food safety. How do you research your checkoff dollars towards ethical decision making, which is what I talk to the youth about? How do we target consumers and help each other understand what we're doing on a daily basis if 79% of your consumers are thinking that our cattle should be raised like our dog and our cat? My couch isn't big enough for the herd bull, and I don't want him there. How many of you have had newborns you've had to bring in the house so they don't get hypothermia? Okay? When they're babies, it's cute. You can take really good pictures and put them on the internet about how you care for babies. When we start caring for those animals when they get bigger and closer to the end of their life, it's not as touchy-feely. But we also have to realize that 21% of our consumers have a low level of agreement that U.S. meat is derived from humanely treated animals. Now, not such a positive story. You've got 21% of your consumers that already think you're doing it wrong. Okay? We need to change that image. But how are we going to change it? So the definition of stewardship has that component of the proper regards for others. So who are those others? We've got moms. I'm a mom. I have a 1-year-old as of yesterday. The food service, they work very closely with the cattle buyers. They work very closely with packers, helping us understand what our consumers are looking for. And the consumers themselves, they're telling us what they want with their purchases, right? We have to be sensitive to where that's going. But did you realize that other livestock producers are included in those others? How many of you would say you're a traditional cattleman? Maybe? Does anybody follow a natural or an organic program for their meat? Sometimes these differing viewpoints occur with your neighbors, your fellow cattlemen. So how do we work towards the same goal of producing a safe, wholesome product for consumers who want different things? We have to understand that proper regard for someone else who uses a different management practices is just as important as it is when our consumer is saying they want that management practice. But we also have to then understand how we coexist in the same industry and not paint this picture of confusion about one is better than another. We have to talk about what the cattle need. It's kind of the point. You have to raise the animal first. So those basic needs of those animals is what you do on a daily basis. You determine what they're feeding, what shelter they get, all in minimizing the stress on that animal. But your consumer and the public wants you to prove your practices that you do. And what that means is just a little more paperwork, right? That's how we prove what we've done on our farms. Treatment records, making sure that you're following withdrawal times on products. We want to make sure that we're justifying our practices appropriately. So how do we do that in our industry? Making sure that we really work on our interactions that we do on a daily basis, maybe with our animals, making sure that we're caring for them appropriately, but then also not forgetting about our neighbors. How are we engaging them on a daily conversational level? Making sure that we are staying up to date on what some of those best management practices are. Are they changing? The dairymen, the farm program said tail docking is going to be a no-no. That changes your management practices. How are you going to adjust? There's a lot of discussions, there's a lot of sometimes frustration when we start talking about people telling us how to do things. We hate that. But we need that to strive towards continuous improvement. We also have to think about those industry training programs that are out there. Your checkoff dollars go right back to work for you in participating in the beef quality assurance trainings, participating in the trucker transport quality assurance trainings. If you choose not to participate, that's your choice. But does it send a message to your consumer who wants their meat to know how it was raised? The answer is yes. So making sure that you're understanding these things might be voluntary still. Are you willing to see the value in those things and saying, you know, it's still voluntary. I maybe don't get a premium yet. But to keep my consumer buying my product, I'm going to be progressively thinking. I'm going to get on board. I'm going to get my certification and maintain my certification. You got to think about the youth. What are we teaching them? And as adults, we need to make sure we stay forever learners. So if we understand that people are more of a puzzle than our animals and cause more problems than our animals likely do, what do we impact? We make the choices of what animals we breed, what genetics they're going to have, what's our breeding goals. We have the choice to impact that. We choose what feed we give our livestock, how much water they get, the quality of that. All of that depends on the product that we're trying to produce. We directly choose what shelter or protection they might get in the environments that they live in, how much space each animal gets. We determine the level of hygiene that animal maintains and the health, the preventative care that animal gets. Is it going to have a vaccination program? Or are we going to wait till something breaks out and then we just use antibiotics as a treatment? Okay, we make those decisions. It impacts the well-being of that animal. We determine how far that animal is going to travel. How many of you show? Anybody show your livestock? Come on, the youth said they did. You determine the amount of travel you do. Does traveling impact the well-being of that animal? Yes. Stress, right? You directly impact the behavior of your cattle by the environment you keep them in. You can train your animal to do things by keeping a routine. The animals you show, you got to change their behavior. You got to teach them to halter lead. That's a direct change of behavior. They're not born that way. They're a little headstrong. We ultimately determine what body parts our animals keep, right? That's a sensitive topic. Now, if we started to determine what body parts people keep, well, it gets a lot more personal. Okay? Some people are making those same connections with how their food is raised. They want to make sure that that animal has a natural life. But where's that focus? It's on the people. Okay? If people are making all these decisions, that's pretty powerful. Cattle aren't making those decisions, but what we choose is determining the amount of stress that animal was under throughout its life and ultimately the level of welfare that that animal experiences throughout its life. Now that becomes very important to your consumer. Who thinks people are easy? Didn't think I'd get any hands. We're all in the livestock business, the farming, hobby farming, show farming, whatever it is, because we enjoy the livestock. Does anybody have a background in psychology, sociology? Okay, people are not easy to understand. If I understood myself, some days I wish I had my own owner's manual because then I would understand myself. And my husband will agree with you. He wishes I had a handbook some days. Okay, but animals are the easy part. But it's the people who are ultimately determining that level of well-being that your cattle, that my steak experiences when it's alive. So we have to figure out this balance of livestock stewardship of an animal and remember that a consumer who never sees that animal alive thinks about these things when they're purchasing the product and when they're eating that product. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So my master's research was actually trying to figure out this cattle-human interaction a little bit more. The effect of handler personality type on feedlot cattle behavior responses was the goal. We all have seen cattle respond differently for somebody else than they do for you. People can do really good with cattle, and then there's people who drive the feed truck. Okay? You want to figure out how somebody responds to the cattle or how those cattle respond to the people, because that actually impacts how the animals experience stress. So, why did we get this topic? So that the handler impacts a few main areas that is very economically important to us as farmers and ranchers, but also to consumers. If you have poor handling, you're going to have higher treatment costs. That definitely is going to impact your bottom line and your break-even points when you're trying to do your balance sheets. If you can minimize treatment costs and the product that you have to use, the vet calls you have to call, just by the way you handle your animals, that sounds pretty valuable to me. Poor handling has a very negative impact on the growth performance of the animals. Animals that are handled rough, they go off feed, they increase their cortisol responses, and their immune system is compromised until they recover. So when you get highly excitable cattle and you work them and they stay worked up, and then they hit the feedlot after they get off that trailer, you're going to have increased treatment costs, and it's going to be harder to get those animals back on feed. So even thinking about giving them their shots and their vaccinations upon arrival is pointless. Their immune system's simply trying to recover from the handling they experienced. Poor handling, it also increases the amount of lameness our animals experience. Lameness has been in the news the last couple of years. May it be for poor handling, or may it be for the products that we use in terms of beta-agonists potentially having a negative impact on lameness. So we have to understand that how our people, may it be you as an owner manager or the employees you hire, has all these impacts on our cattle. And our consumers concerned. So if our consumer's concerned and they buy our product, we also had better take an interest in what they're saying. There's definite research to back up that poor handling has a negative impact on the quality of the meat that comes off that animal. You have an increased chance of dark cutting beef, which it has a negative impact on the quality, decreased shelf life. In addition to that, just the amount of bruising that an animal has on its carcass from poor handling has to get cut off at the packing plant. You've now lost potential food that could be fed to an increasing global population. Well, if we need to raise more food for the world and we're throwing it away by bruising, by animals that are getting condemned because they're too lame, we could solve some issues there, right? Pretty easily. We also have to be concerned about our human capital. Do you consider yourself as an owner or an employee human capital, a human asset? You are, if you talk business terms. People who work with cattle have a very high incident rate of injuries. How many of you have been in this picture before? It's kind of an entertaining picture, right? Very realistic, isn't it? Hits close to home. Okay? The goal is to not get injured. You don't have to prove you're fearless. You don't have to prove your manhood, guys. The same research also found that guys have a higher incident rates than females, too. I'll leave it at that. But the research also found that human error still is the #1 reason that these accidents are happening. Well, that seems controllable, right? If it's the humans that are the ones that potentially are making the choices and interacting with those animals, we can change our behavior. It's not easy, but we can do it. You also have to consider about stockman expertise. We have a pretty good age range of people still in the crowd, and the youth are obviously at another location. All of us have had different backgrounds growing up, may it be raising cattle from the day you were born to those of us that either joined the industry because we love animals and wanted to be a vet and now have to learn how to react with those animals, to somebody who maybe married into a family, never knowing what the farm life was like. There's very different degrees of people that are coming into our livestock industries that need training, that don't have those backgrounds. So how do we go about making sure that they stay safe when they work with our animals? The expertise is kind of a balance. People are born with natural abilities or skills, but you also have to learn through your experiences. And so as the generations have removed themselves from the farm, you've lost some of that. And so you lose some of that firsthand knowledge, or that common sense that we call it, about how an animal behaves and how you react in those situations. So that's kind of the logic to the project. But then why did I choose personality type? The main reason why we pursued personality type was it's the thing that kind of remains consistent over time. We have a lot of experiences that shape us, but your personality type impacts your behavior, your decision making, and it actually stays consistent quite well over culture. The other thing we think about is personality type impacts the jobs that we like, the jobs we might go pursue. And there's been some research to show that different personality types sometimes get hurt more than others. So some people are bold and courageous and get themselves in that situation where they're not going to back down from that cow no matter what. I'm going to get the job done. Okay? It has its place. Also, personality type, you can assess it. And sometimes it's a way of evaluating performance. So it was a very useful way to approach the people side, which is our hard side to evaluate. Other things that we have to think about with the project was, how are we going to measure the cattle reactions? How do you go about measuring well-being? There's some research out there that talks about vocalization, making sure that if you're being attuned to your animals, are they vocalizing? Are they in pain? Are they in stress? Other measurements include slipping and falling during handling, the amount of chaos that's going on, the pace that those animals are responding. The other important thing that we had to remember was, if this is going to be kind of a tool to use and evaluate the cattle responses, you got to get some consistency. Just like auditors have to figure out how to use a tool, an auditing tool, we had to figure out how to get the minimal amount of reviewer variation in assessing this. So we used some of the tools that already exist, using some of the feedlot tools that Dr. Grannon has put together, some of the transportation, using some of that to kind of shape how we approach this. So the real objectives to the project, one was to get that scoring method of the cattle reactions. And the other one was then to actually figure out and evaluate, was there an effect of the handler personality type? So the personality type assessments that we use the Myers-Briggs personality type. And so we had a very small sample of students as well as our feedlot workers that participated. There's really no other research to compare this to, so it was preliminary data trying to feel out the waters to find if there was something to pursue. Those of you that might be familiar with the Myers-Briggs assessment, you have two different dichotomies. There's 4 of them. And so they use those, and you go through a questionnaire, and it places you into a personality type. So our group of 12, we found that it was challenging in some respects to figure out and try to balance the level of experience of people. So our goal in approaching that was at least finding those individuals in our department that had cattle background or were working towards cattle work. So our large animal graduate students, our feedlot workers who have already had that experience, were part of it. The other assessment we used was what was called a character strength assessment. Now this one was a different approach, and again, we're probably all animal people, not necessarily human scientists. So this one had a different approach. You still fill out a questionnaire, but it places you in terms of your character strengths. So some of those you would see: prudence or honesty, judgment, your zest, your teamwork. They all had definitions that go with them, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining that. And so for my placement or categorizing of the people, I used that and I placed them based off of their top 3 strengths. And so if they got these 3 circled strengths here, the assessment would also categorize them. Were they more heart thinking, or are they more mindful in their thought process, or do they think about others versus themselves more? So that's why you see the mind, the heart, and the others, and the self. So it kind of categorized those character strengths based on a larger category. So this individual would have then be placed as heart, because 2 out of the 3 were closer to the heart, and also then more as an others. So that placement was how that individual would be placed based on their top 3 strengths. So the actual cattle side of things, we had to figure out what the people were going to do with the cattle. How are we going to look at this? So we thought about typical cattle interactions and came up with 3 specific exercises. The first one was pretty basic. We wanted them to just approach a pressure zone but not really interact. So the task that the people were given was simply they had 3 tag numbers of animals that they had to write down based off of the paint brands they had on their hip. So they had to walk into a pen of cattle. You see the dirt lot picture, those were the pens our cattle were kept in. They had to walk in, find the right paint branded number, and get close enough to read a tag. We do that on a daily basis. You go out, do health checks, you got to figure out which animal's sick. You don't necessarily have to go interact with that animal to get a tag number. And the second exercise, we wanted to actually have them interact with the cattle at a certain extent. So what they had to do, they had to go into the pen of 14 steers, and all they had to do was split them into 2 equal groups on the opposite ends of the pen and hold them apart for 10 seconds. That was it. Nothing hard there, right? We split groups of animals all the time. It's a little bit closer interaction than just having to go in and read ear tags. Our third interaction was specifically trying to get at close interactions. So they took from their home pens, those dirt lots you saw in the picture, took them down the alley, down to our sorting alley, which is in the dotted spot there. And then they had to just sort each animal back one by one. So now they've got into a sorting alley, which is close quarters. You're going to get a little bit more reaction out of the animals, and so those people have to pay attention a little bit more. So our 12 handlers that we selected, they went through, they did their personality type assessments. We then randomly assigned them to 2 of 3 pens of cattle. It didn't matter what their personality type was. We didn't know. We just assigned them randomly to those groups. Each pen of cattle was handled a total of 8 times. But within each day that we had people come out, we wanted to make sure that each pen was not handled more than 2 times. So I rearranged schedules just to make sure that those that were assigned to pens, we could balance out each pen for each day. This way, we all know that cattle kind of figure out what we want them to do. So we wanted to limit the conditioning of those animals to the tasks we were asking them. And then we videotaped all of this, and then myself and 3 other reviewers critiqued the videos and then used our scoring system, which we developed. So our scoring system was based on these 9 behavior responses that we identified as kind of important ones. Where the animal's attention was, so we had a desirable score, which was a +1, +2, +3 scale, or there was an undesirable score for a -1, -2, -3. So we had a total of a 6-point scale. The attention of the animals is important. We wanted to make sure we could evaluate if they were having problems in the cattle getting excited, so we talked about fence contact. We also tried to figure out some other ones, the curiosity of animals. Why would we choose that? Some people think that the amount of fear an animal has is a sign of its well-being, so we were trying to figure out some of those other things that potentially could be important in terms of behavior responses. We also, excitability, that's pretty easy to see. The flight zone, we wanted to kind of just gauge, was it a long distance, was it a short distance? How the animals moved, was their footing okay? Did they stay in a group or did they just all scatter for gregarious? The movement of those animals, did they kind of maintain a fluid motion depending on the task that they were asked? And then obviously the pace. So those undesirable things for each of those 9 items, we wanted to make sure that we figured out what might be good for all 3 of those exercises. And that was probably the hardest part of this project, was what's good, what's a bad response? You know it when you see it, but when you have to put words to it, there's a whole new way of trying to think about evaluating cattle behavior. So that was the 9 points to our score. We then summed the 9 responses to get our total cattle score. So how we went about actually analyzing the score, we used a completely random design for our experimental design. Our personality type and the cattle exercise remained as our fixed variables, and our random variables remained to be our reviewer, because we had 4 of them, our pen, and all other interactions. So what we also wanted to do, we had to evaluate that scoring system. So we looked for correlations between our score variables. So those 9 items, we tried to figure out were they related? Were they kind of measuring the same thing? And what we found was that excitability and movement were actually correlated with the same 3 variables. So what we did next was we took out those 3 variables that they were correlated to simplify our score. So we left excitability in and movement in because they were simply evaluating some of the same things. So if we looked at the score and we used our scores of our handlers, and this example here is just the introverted, extroverted of the Myers-Briggs assessment. And what I have there in red, what we found is that our cattle score actually was a pretty good model. That R squared kind of means, did it explain the differences we saw between our handlers and the way the cattle reacted? We wanted to also then figure out, well, was there a difference? And we wanted to make sure, did our reviewers do a good job? There was not a reviewer by personality type interaction, which means our reviewers didn't play favorites on the personality type of the individual that was handling in the videos. Now, there was almost a 0.06 there for our personality type, or excuse me, on the personality type, you'll see a less than 0.01. There was just a personality type interaction, and there was just a reviewer interaction. So even though there was not favorites to the personality types by the reviewer, there was still a significant reviewer interaction. So maybe we shouldn't have necessarily taken it out of our model as we went on. But since we did not see the personality type by reviewer interaction, we decided to then combine our reviewer scores when we went on for our last analysis. So I had the 3 different exercises. So we also wanted to figure out, were they good? Did they do what we thought they were going to do? And so all the exercises showed that there was a significant way to identify a difference between handler personality types. And that's what this is showing here. The 0.49 that R squared is saying that it's explaining 49% of the variation that you see between your 2 personality type categories. And so that was good for us to see. It's kind of gauging about half of the variability, and it's proving to be significant. So if we broke down the exercises on their own, exercise 1, where they just had to go read the ear tags, really wasn't explaining the differences we were seeing. That's fine. All the cattle were pretty calm when the person walked into the pen. You had to get just close enough. If you're nearsighted like me, you got to get a little bit closer. But we didn't get a lot of reaction, so the scores were pretty good. Positive scores. The cattle behaved appropriately. So then you see exercise 2 by itself, and you see that it became significant and was able to tell some differences in our handler personality types. So that was nice to see. And then also exercise 3, that one also was significant and able to explain some of that variation. So those 2 exercises together, we kind of kept in and we combined them to kind of see if they explained any more of the variation. And they also remained significant to be able to help us understand differences in personality type. So that was the first objective of the project, was get a scoring system. So then we shifted from that to actually then using that scoring system to determine how those animals actually reacted. So we changed our analytical model, and so what we did, we used then our adjusted cattle score, and we set up our total adjusted cattle score using both exercise 2 and exercise 1, since they were both useful. What was interesting is I'm only showing you information about the Myers-Briggs, and the reason why is that was the only assessment that actually proved to help us show differences. The way that the character strength assessment was set up, it was very good and helped explain and have a person understand themselves, but it really doesn't work in science and research in terms of you need a really big population of people to find differences using that tool. So on our small one, we didn't see any statistical differences in our handlers based on just that character strength. However, when we looked at our introverted and extroverted dichotomy, we were able to see that there was still a large amount of variability explained. That 0.47 is our explanation of that variability. But it was only a trend. That p-value is just a 0.1. And so this being preliminary data, it's kind of interesting to see that there still might be something there. People are still the important part that are having an impact on how our cattle are behaving, which has that direct impact on our pocketbook and the quality of the meat that your consumer's getting. So kind of wrapping up on that, we were able to observe those human-cattle interactions using our 3 different exercises and figured out that actually getting the person to interact with those animals and not just walk into a pen was much more valuable to see the interactions. Our scoring system, we were able to evaluate it and find some of those key observations that people need to look at when we talk about cattle reactions, and is it positive or is it negative? And then finding that those exercises were useful. Now when we talk about the human side, just due to the way that these personality type assessments were set up, the Myers-Briggs, that introverted and extroverted dichotomy really was the one that stood out to us. All the other ones were not significant and not even close to having any trends for being able to identify differences in our handlers. So there seems to be something to this concept of personality type and understanding what makes a person do what they do. Now, what does that mean? Why am I talking about personality type and cattle behavior? Well, being able to identify these simple interactions can maybe help you figure out who's good at their job or who needs a little bit more training and guidance on how to handle cattle in a low-stress manner. Also, using the scoring system, it was repeatable across our reviewers, but also we had reviewers that were knowledgeable in cattle handling. What would have happened if we had somebody from the general public be a reviewer? Would we see the same scores? Sometimes we have to also think about who our reviewers are. And for us as cattle producers, farmers, ranchers, hobby farmers, show farmers, whatever it is, we have to figure out who's our reviewers, who's our critics. Are they using the same scoring system that we would use to say we're doing a good job? And I think some of our industry members are trying to get to that point. We're trying to evaluate, are we doing a good job? Are we being sustainable? Are we doing good on our welfare of our animals? So there's something to personality type and understanding who you are. But we also have to keep in mind that our cattle speak their own language. Right? We speak our own language. Raise your hand. How many of you are the only owner for your cattle? Okay. How many of you have employees that work for you? Okay. How many of you have random hired neighbor help? Okay, not too many. We have to also then think about the language of other people that work with us. There's a lot of people in livestock industries that are more of an introverted person, and we saw higher cattle behavior scores for those that were introverted versus extroverted. We have to understand that I don't have the same personality type. I don't make decisions the same way you do. We have to think the generational differences. What experiences shaped who you are and how you do your business each day versus your next generation coming in to either help you or the next generation coming in to take over for you. Because we have direct communication with our animals every day. We also have direct communication with those who work with us or are hired under us every day. But we also have to now understand that not just you as an owner have a direct impact on your animal's welfare. Your ability to communicate effectively to everybody who interacts with your animals will determine that level of welfare that animal experiences. You can have the best SOP, standard operating procedures you want in writing. But unless you communicate your expectations to every person who does a part of that, you're going to get differing levels of outcomes. And the real big challenge is if we don't know how to communicate simply about these topics and our expectations, well, do we really understand it? After doing my master's project, I don't understand people any better. But I'm getting real good at watching cattle tell me what they want and what they need. Learning to be observant of what is an indicator of stress or positive well-being is very important. So what's your role? And I'll try to wrap up here with a few things and kind of some challenges for you. If you are an owner or a manager and you have influence with other people, you need to learn how to be a leader first. Figure out and ask yourself, what are my expectations for the level of care I want my animal to experience on a daily basis? Set them in writing. If you're trying to figure out who's going to take over ownership someday, especially, that's important to have things in writing. Get those expectations communicated. If I got $1 for every time somebody said, well, this is how we've always done it, I could retire probably already. If we want to keep the mentality that we're already doing it as good as we can, you're missing the boat. Just as Wanda said, they've changed how they care for their animals on their farm in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And there's probably going to keep being changes in how we care for animals. So don't settle for, well, it worked yesterday, because your consumer is a moving target. They have different experiences than you, and they're going to change their expectations like this just by reading an incorrect blog post, right? We have to understand that you can't settle for what worked in the past. And what's really important is understanding that each one of us is a teacher. We're a teacher to those who are working with us. We're a teacher to those who maybe have never experienced cattle. So we have to understand how to communicate effectively in that respect. And we have to understand that we communicate, but we have to do it well. And as much as we want to focus on the cattle because they're what gives us a paycheck at the end of the day instead of writing a paycheck for somebody else who helps us, we have to understand that if you don't focus on the people, you maybe will never hit your expectations of the level of care that you want for your animals. You maybe won't hit those performance goals you're trying to hit just because somebody's not mixing the ration right. Maybe they're just pushing those animals too hard, getting them on a truck. So we have to learn how to talk to people. And what's in the value of hiring that right person? Or if you're looking for a job, how do you become that right person? We have to remember that those personal experiences that shape us, they're good. You can look at the background and what's kind of shaped a person, but that's going to be wide and varied. And especially the new workforce coming in, those graduating college and entering the cattle industry, you have to understand the difference in mentality, the differences of how those experiences they've had have shaped their work ethic, shaped their common sense. Common sense is taking a new definition when we start talking farm talk. So we have to understand book knowledge and translating that to the firsthand experience. When we talk about personality type, looking at the person you're trying to hire and making sure that they have a good character so they can make decisions when that time comes. Making sure that you figure out who fits on your farm, on your ranch, whatever it is, making sure that they fit with your production goals and that you can actually work together in a good manner. And if you're having employees with you, you have to understand that they're still training. It doesn't have to be this huge owner's manual, training handbook, but you have to understand that those people coming into the workforce need guidance, mentoring. Training is the word that's starting to have a negative connotation, in my opinion. In our department, we talk about mentors. We talk about our graduate and our undergrad students having faculty mentors, or even our newer faculty having older faculty mentors. The value of that applies on your farming operation to make sure that you're getting the expectations carried out for how you care for your animals. And again, they need to know your expectations. Communicate in writing, communicate in some way, making sure it's effective. And we can't go anywhere without talking about technology and how that has impacted how we care for our animals. We have video cameras. May it be just to help with calving season, may it be for security purposes. How are we using those? We have rumination trackers to know our animal's healthy. Barn designs, making sure we've got proper ventilation. We talk about all these different things shaping what livestock well-being looks like. They can be good, used improperly, they can be negative. However we decide to implement them on their farm, we need to realize that we have to train people of how to use them. So I kind of want to close. How many of you heard your cattle say, it was his fault? That was the one over there that ran away. Don't punish all of us and keep us in the corral. No. Cattle don't play the blaming game. They follow suit because they want to survive. People have a choice. So once we get past the concept of his fault, her fault, their fault, not me, we have to understand that us, as the person who's interacting with those animals, is what is determining the welfare they experience. So we have to figure out how we can be objective about looking at ourselves, learn a little bit about yourself, take a personality assessment, because you're the people that are going to go out, interact with your animals, and make those choices for those animals. So making sure that we can improve animal well-being by being teachable, by being forward-thinking, and staying on top of whatever consumers and the public is finding acceptable. And making sure that we get those facts, making sure we stay on top of the science to support our choices on our farm. So with that, I guess I will take a couple of questions if we have time.